for you all to hear. So, Marcy Mirsky, who runs the International Center for Transitional Justice, is going to start us off today. Marcy joined the center in 2011 as the director of the program office, and I thought it was wonderful in Kate's presentation that she underscored the important work of the Historical Clarification Commission in Guatemala's Truth Commission. Marcy was an investigator with that commission. She also was a member of the International Commission Against Impunity, CICIG in Guatemala. She really brings a wealth of experience in Latin America, looking at issues related to rule of law. She received her master's from Harvard, and we're very thankful that she is here with us today.
I'm going to try and push this, but it doesn't seem to want to be pushed. So I will maybe try this one. Does that work? No?
Push it again.
Push it again?
There you go.
Yes. Okay, does that work?
Yes.
Okay, I can hear myself. I think that is an echo. I won't be able to say everything twice. I was going to speak a little bit about rule of law issues in Guatemala, but I think I'm going to rather focus on just a couple of main reform issues and a couple of key but I think it's really important in making it possible to try these kinds of human rights violations, these kinds of crimes from the conflict in the national justice system. But I have to say that it's, having prepared these comments before, after last night, I felt like maybe we should just rip it up and start again. But I haven't done that. But I do want to say that I think yesterday was a very sad day for rule of law in Guatemala. Perhaps the 3-2 vote that we saw in the Constitutional Court reflects its own precarious and divided situation on how these cases from the past conflict should be treated. And perhaps in some way it's still a reflection of the country's own polarization. Perhaps because of that, it shouldn't come as a surprise to many of us, especially those who work around justice issues in Guatemala for a long time. So as I said, I won't talk about the trial as such. The other people on the panel will go into some, or two of these will go into some detail on the trial. But rather, I'm going to try and focus on two key reform measures as they relate to human rights trials from the armed conflict and the Rios Montt trial. And I will highlight only a few of these key internal issues, since we've already heard a fair amount about the relationship between international jurisdictions or international efforts and the national courts. But some of these things that I think have made it possible to try cases in the national justice system. I wanted to start out, though, with a little bit of background on human rights cases or crimes from the conflict that have been tried in Guatemala to date. Prior to the Rios Montt trial, there had been only 8 trials on crimes from the conflict that had gone to sentence in Guatemala. And here I'm not including the assassination case around Monsignor Bradley, because that was a couple of years after the peace accords were signed. Clearly, it's a conflict-related case, but I have included there were 8 prior to the Rios Montt. Since 2009, this includes 4 cases of forced disappearance from the war, which have been successfully tried. There were convictions in all cases, with 7 people sentenced to long prison terms. 5 of the people convicted were members of paramilitary groups organized by the Guatemala Army. Most significantly, the other 2 men who were convicted based on chain of command responsibility and arguments. One was an Army colonel who headed the military base where disappearances had occurred, and the other was a former head of a major division of the National Police who had signed orders for the operation of the disappearance. The latter was also convicted of crimes against humanity commission disappearance. Besides these 4 cases of forced disappearance, approximately 15 people have been convicted with long sentences in 3 massacre cases. Negro, Maria Sanchez, and West for murder and crimes against humanity. convictions in one of the cases included 5 Guatemalan Special Forces members, the highest ranking among them is a lieutenant. The other convictions have been, all the other convictions have been of local paramilitary units, rather than the military itself. Before 2009, so this is all from 2009. That is to say, how many years is that after the peace accords? That's almost 20 years after peace accords for those cases to go forward. The only case related to the conflict that was tried successfully and went to sentence before 2009 was the Niconak case. And in 1994, the military intelligence operative who murdered her was given a 20-year sentence. And in 2002, one of the three senior military men charged with responsibilities in the crime was also convicted. The other 2 were acquitted. The man who was convicted, fled the country while the conviction was being appealed. So there's one prisoner, and Helen could talk for hours and hours about the struggles and trials and tribulations of that process. Just like the Rio Small genocide case, which took over a decade to get to trial, each of these cases I've mentioned have taken years to wind through the judicial process and make it to trial. But there has been some progress. There have been these cases, there have been convictions, there has been jurisprudence generated by the national tribunals. And while this progress has been very limited compared to the magnitude of the crimes committed, it has been important for the victims and for the slow accretion of legal condemnation for the atrocities that were committed. So it is limited, but it's important in terms of national jurisprudence, in terms of victims' rights, and in terms of the legal condemnation, at least for these atrocities. I'm not going to, in the next part, so that's what's happened to date until this trial. I'm not going to, in terms of the reform of the justice system that's relevant, I'm not going to talk about the literally, and I'm not making this up, the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been poured into the Guatemalan justice system, both the prosecutor's office and the courts, in the last 20 or 25 years. I'm sure that some of that has been very important for basic institutional strengthening, but it's very difficult to assess and to see the concrete results in the fight against impunity. But I want to talk instead about 4 internal factors that I think have been essential for this progress. This is immediate progress, but important. 2 of these are what we call reform measures, and 2 are what could be called human factors. And it's really the combination of those, I think, that have brought us about. The first is a relatively old reform. It was introduced about 20 years ago when the Guatemalan Criminal Procedural Code was extensively reformed in the early 1990s. The figure introduced into that procedural code is a figure known as the querellante adhesivo, which is a complementary prosecutor. It's one way of translating it. Some people maybe who know the French system, it's often called a civil party. So it's that kind of figure. This allows an individual, such as a victim, or an organization whose objectives coincide with the nature of the case, to essentially become part of the prosecution. That's a complementary prosecution. A pretrial judge rules on a request to become an organization, or victims organization, when charges are first heard. And thus, human rights and victims organizations have been able to participate in all stages of the criminal investigations and trials once they have been admitted as paid members. They can introduce evidence, they can question, they can cross-examine witnesses, and they can present their own arguments in the trial. It's an extremely powerful figure in the code, which Helen was an absolute pioneer in making it work. In saying, this is these 3 words in the code, let's give them life, let's throw life into them and make them work. figure has been, this form, the KDF has been essential in seeking justice for conflict-related crimes. In fact, every single one of the 9 human rights cases from the conflict has involved a human rights organization or victims group or individual victim as a KDF as a complementary prosecutor. In all cases, the querellante has played a vital role, particularly in constructing and providing all or a major part of the evidence used in the trial. This is especially important until recent times. I think a couple of the panelists on the previous panel mentioned in earlier years when the public prosecutor's office either entirely ignored the responsibilities for investigating these crimes or actively blocked investigations. So that it was the querellantes over the last 10, 15 years who built the cases, who gathered the evidence, who constructed the arguments that have allowed these cases to go forward today. And at times, too, the querellantes continue to play a very important role in pushing the public prosecutor's office forward and building political support for the cases as well. So the querellante, I cannot stress how important that has been in the Guatemalan system, making it work as far as it's worked. I think now the public prosecutor has a commitment to taking forward, to investigating and taking cases forward on its own. But when that happens, it will be the first. The second reform measure that I wanted to mention too has been much more recent, but also very important for the more recent advances. And that was through a congressional decree in November of 2008 that empowered the Supreme Court to create what are called the higher risk tribunals. These are the tribunales de mayor riesgo, so that if you can follow the Rios Montt case, you heard reference to these tribunales de mayor riesgo, or these higher risk tribunals. These tribunals were established for cases when, given the nature of the crimes being tried, extraordinary security measures would be necessary to ensure the physical security of the parties. According to the law, in addition to organized crime, money laundering, drug trafficking, and other similar bad deeds, these tribunals may hear cases of genocide, forced disappearance, torture, and violations of international humanitarian law. All of the cases we're talking about. There are now 2 salas, or 2 chambers, the A chamber and the B chamber, which I'm sure you also read about it in following this, with a total of just 8 judges. So it's 4 in each chamber. That's it. And they hear all such cases. The first of these chambers was created in December 2010, the second in June of 2011. In July of last year, another major piece of that system was put into place when they created an appeals chamber for appeals on the sentences coming out of a higher risk course, also to be created. This appeals chamber for higher risk cases has not been involved in the appeals in the Rios Montt case, however. As I understand it, and somebody here can correct me if I'm wrong, because the appeals being heard so far on the Rios Montt cases are related to matters prior to the sentence. So if they had won the sentence, it would have gone to the high-risk chamber. The judges and magistrates in the higher-risk system have been quite carefully vetted from the beginning. They were proposed by the Judicial Career Council and selected by the Supreme Court, which in Guatemala also administers the justice system. So they don't have a justice department apart from, but rather in this. And despite the vetting, we're beginning to see some strong signs of corruption, at least of one of the judges in this case. Judges are generally better prepared, have strong records, are better paid, and better protected. Some of them also have earlier human rights cases, most notably the woman who presided the Guatemalan genocide case, Yasmin Barrios, who was a sentencing judge in the MAP case and the Barragán case. And all of the conflict-related cases since the creation of the high-risk tribunals have been heard in those tribunals. So they play a very important role in speeding things along with judges who have greater knowledge of jurisprudence on these kinds of cases, and in some cases more commitment to moving them through. I should add here that the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, CC, was the key force behind the proposal to create the higher risk tribunals and a powerful political actor in getting the Guatemalan Congress to pass the law that established them. CC is a hybrid mechanism, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, that was established in 2007 by agreement between the UN and the Guatemalan government to assist the Ministerio Público, that is the Public Prosecutor's Office, and the police in criminal investigations and prosecutions. And interestingly, actually, CC, in order to operate in the justice system, also uses the figure of Kenya Dexi. That's how it operates in the prosecution cases. So this figure has also been key for CC as well. While CC has not participated in any of the conflict-related human rights cases, as a minimum, its central role in the creation of the higher risk tribunals has been a major contribution to the recent advance in these trials. Okay, so these measures have done something to create, together with those hundreds of $1 millions, that's hard to figure out exactly, which is on exactly what it did. But all of that together did indeed create a somewhat stronger system, a significantly stronger system than what we had 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago for that matter. So it's a system with both greater capacity and greater independence, but it's still not a robust system that can function as an institution by itself in a lot of ways. And it's certainly still very far from independent, as we so often see, especially in these cases where major corruption cases or major organized crime cases as well. And this is where the other two factors that I wanted to mention very quickly, because I'm just about out of time, but they are as probably more important than the others I mentioned, but wouldn't perhaps have the same effect if we didn't have that institutional basis as well. These are the human factors I mentioned right back in the beginning. The first one is the leadership at the highest level, and the second is hopefully a growing number of honest and brave prosecutors and judges whose work is enabled by that leadership at the top. So we have institutions that have been strengthened but which are not yet strong enough or robust enough to pursue politically charged cases without those committed individuals, especially at the top. Here I'm talking specifically about Attorney General Claudia Paz, who has greatly energized the prosecutor's office to act on conflict-related cases, and given full support to the prosecutors working on these cases. Without her leadership and the policies and practices that she introduced, it's safe to say that the Rio Swamp case would never come. Nor would there be a clear focus in conflict-related cases on pursuing those with the greatest responsibility. This has taken enormous courage, and her administration should be supported by all of us and everybody who can mobilize to get support of that administration. Similarly, I think it probably gets less credit, but also very important, the president of the Criminal Chamber of the Supreme Court has provided clear support to the strengthening and enabling of the work of the higher risk tribunals, whilst people have respected their independence. That leadership has also been very important. And then finally, there's this group of hopefully growing numbers of honest, dedicated, committed, courageous prosecutors and judges. And I think for any of us who were at the Rio Swamp trial at any point, we were overwhelmed by the courage, the integrity, the brilliance, the commitment to justice, the honesty, especially of the presiding judge of the panel as well. It was really overwhelming, awesome, as someone said. But true in a deep meaning of awesome, to bring awe into us. So I was asked here to speak about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've spoken most about the good. I know Helen will spend a lot of time on bad and the ugly. So I decided to leave that to her. And but I did want to say one thing about the bad and the ugly, and I really will stop. On the human rights cases, especially if they are from the armed conflict, the greatest obstacles at this point to judicial independence and further advances are to be found in the former military and perhaps even more importantly in the private sector. The genocide trial has laid bare their racist attitudes, as we've not seen in a very long time, and their interference, and never has it been cruder than what we've seen in recent days. They've made clear really that those parts of the business sector who Wendy called the richest of the rich, manage to sort of group forces around them. The most powerful in the private sector, what they've made clear is that not only do they own their own businesses in Guatemala, but they'd like everyone else to believe that they own the courts and the country as well. That's become eminently clear in this last few weeks. They've also made clear that what's really at stake in this particular case is whether they will recognize or not the authority of the courts over their own power. And what they have said so far is they're not willing to recognize that authority over their own